Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. From the historical struggle of the working class to the present-day effect of capitalism, key moments have grown into strong movements as the forces of labor often have to contend with the ideals of minimum wage and the idea of maximum inequality. No wonder the average worker in Africa believes the odds of survival are far from being stacked in his or her favor, with sustainable demands and inadequate supply stuck in a revolving door. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the latest demand for a minimum wage in Nigeria amidst a looming nationwide strike in the coming days? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report now, and Africa Today will be right back. Welcome on board.
Pegging the new national minimum wage at a figure acceptable to all employers of labor has continued to prove elusive. The strike recently embarked on by organized labor may have prompted a reconvening of the tripartite committee, but it has done little else. While organized labor and the organized private sector had been able to shift ground to arrive at the 30,000 naira minimum wage, it is a figure that has not found resonance with state governors who insist on 20,000 naira.
We have a figure of the federal government and the state governments have theirs. The state government figure as the last time was 20,000. The federal government had a figure of 24,000, and that was where we all stood. And this negotiation took into account these irreducible offers from the different governments, but we could not arrive at a consensus. Even though we adjourned our meeting and said we'll put up a report that will reflect this position, we are still continuing to discuss.
Besides, not all employers of labor in the private sector feel comfortable with the 30,000 naira minimum wage. The labor minister insists that the ability of different employers of labor to pay is the guiding principle in fixing the minimum wage, which will become a national law.
You don't hoist on somebody an agreement you cannot implement. You don't make a law that people find difficult to implement. The issue of national minimum wage is a national law that will bind everybody. Informal sector, private sector, organized and unorganized, government, and in government, federal government, state government, and local government.
He is confident that the tripartite committee will soon arrive at a figure comfortable to all parties and insists that the talks are not deadlocked. Arriving at a new national minimum wage acceptable to all is a huge task the Buhari government must quickly resolve if it must go into elections on a sound footing.
Well, before we get into the discussion of the day, let's update you on some of the top news stories around Africa. The Central African Republic's ousted assembly leader has called for calm, saying he would legally challenge his sacking. Algeria's frail president, Abdulaziz Bouteflika, in power since 1999, will stand for a fifth term in elections next year. And activists in Equatorial Guinea have alleged that plainclothes security forces snatched and beat up the head of their Human Rights and Development Organization over the weekend. Now joining me to look at the latest demand for minimum wage in Nigeria amidst a looming nationwide strike in the coming days is Tony Dania, a lawyer and a social commentator. And on phone, I have Comrade Abiodun Aremu, activist and executive member, Joint Action Front. Good to have you gentlemen on the program at this time.
Good evening, viewers.
It's a pleasure to join you at the program.
Okay, fine. Let's begin with you now, Abiodun Aremu. What exactly is happening between the labor organization and the government right now as we speak ahead of the planned strike coming up next month?
I think it's irresponsible of any government to have its representative in a committee twisting the fact of the matter. As a matter of fact, there was a consensus contrary to the misguided information, deliberately misguided information being generated to the public by the Honorable Minister of Labour. There is a minute to that meeting. The presentations by Labour at the tripartite committee was on 56,000 naira. As a matter of fact, that agreement at that committee level, Labour was literally begged to accept the 30,000, and that's why it becomes the irreducible minimum. You have Edo State as the current minimum wage. Edo State paid 25,000 naira. So these are questions of trying to twist, you see, and give the impressions that the government, the governors in particular, you see, are talking about the ability to pay. The question is not about the ability to pay. In the first instance, this minimum wage for a responsible government was due statutorily by 2016 by an act of the parliament, of the law itself, because the minister kept referring to law. If you have a government obeying the rule of law, minimum wage should be due for review every 5 years. The last minimum wage was signed on March 23rd, 2011. So by March of this year, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, you have a minimum wage already due for that review. So when you see have that government twisting facts, so the point is that the minister should be challenged to bring out the resolution of that last meeting where there was an agreement for that 30,000 naira. So it's just a deliberate attempt to create confusion. So there was an agreement, which is not in dispute. So I want people to ask for,
but the federal government,
yeah.
The federal government, according to the minister, says that there wasn't a consensus, which you clearly say you clearly deny. Yes, you insist that there was a consensus, but part of what the cardinal principle of wage fixing under the International Labour Organization is the capacity to pay, and that is the insistence of the federal government that if it has to implement a national minimum wage, it has to be in a tandem with all affected. According to him, some states cannot pay 30,000 naira, and some states are pegging it at 20,000 naira, while the federal government says it's 24, and the private sector is here or there, but they are in between. Some are saying 25, some are saying 30. So how can you foist all of these members of this tripartite committee now to accept that a 30,000 naira minimum wage should be the peg for all workers, knowing fully well that there is a law from the ILO that any wage that must be fixed must have any wage that must be fixed must be on the capacity for anyone to pay. So how can this be achieved if we have a law guarding this principle?
No, if you want to go into capacity to pay, and that's why we are saying first and foremost, you are talking about capacity to pay. Where is the security vote from? Is it not from the national income? We are saying let the governors forfeit their security vote and see whether you cannot pay that minimum wage. Secondly, get the positions of the organized private sector, not what the minister is saying. The private sectors were at that meeting, and they were part of the consensus for that 30,000 naira. So it should not be the minister speaking that. So for the governors that he's talking about, I'm not sure the governors will be insisting on that. Where we Edo State has been paying 25,000 since 2011 agreement of the minimum wage.
That's a fine place to hold your thought. Now, let me quickly bring in... No, you will continue you still have time for you to talk on this issue. Tony Dania, from his position, definitely it's quite dicey for the federal government and Labour, and there is an impending strike coming up next month. Where do you see this heading? Well,
like you rightly said, the ILO has a standard practice for negotiating wage increase or wage review, and the ability of the person that intend to pay the wage matters. I won't say that the minimum wage, like the man on the phone said, is overdue for review. And I know that it ought to be reviewed every 5 years. And then the amount to be paid, I advise Labour to be realistic in negotiating the minimum wage. I also advise government to consider the fact that even 56 is not good enough. But if we have to be realistic, we look at abilities to pay by the component parts of the entity Nigeria. And that is the private sectors and the states and local government. Because whatever they agree on, the states, branches of the Nigerian labor will want to start their own. The local government, the same thing. The workers want to start their own. So my take is that I would strongly advise labor to rather pursue further and stronger negotiation than to opt for another strike.
Further negotiation in what terms now?
Yes, but all parties have to be realistic.
All right.
We need to look at the ability of the entity to pay.
Right.
If the federal government is saying that, well, he mentioned the security vote. I thought he was also going to talk about the salaries of the members of the National Assembly, the payment of entitlements to governors that have only ruled for 8 years, you know. Well, I am aware that all these are wrong, but that is the practice for now. Until that is changed, you cannot use that as a basis to discuss salary. We are aware unofficially that the security votes are being abused. It is not the federal government that fixed it is not the National Assembly members that fix their own salary. You will not believe that it is the executive. We have the commission, the agency in charge of salaries for both the president and everybody. So I'm surprised at the bogus allowances. And this will make labor to have sympathy from Nigerians, that if all this money are being paid, why don't you suspend some expenses and use it to pay labor? And labor should not forget too that as you are talking about increase in salary, you have a boomerang effect on costs of
cost of living.
Cost of living generally. The market women will want to exploit that to talk about, to increase their
So in other words, to have a ripple effect.
Yes, it will have some ripple, boomerang effect. Yeah. Yes. And I also want to take labor up on this. We have been hearing of salary review only. It is the duty of labor too to look at services at public places. You are talking of salary review for among public workers, right? And then you talk of public educational institutions. People take their children and waltz to private institutions. Then talk about public health centers and hospitals. People prefer to go to the private. So and yet you are talking of increase for the salary of these persons. Why don't you talk of improving the institutions themselves, so that whatever you earn as salary can have meaningful, you can use it meaningfully.
Impact as well. But let's hold your thought now. We need to go on a very quick break. We'll have more discussions in just a moment. Stay with us. Comrade Aremu. Hello? Hello, are you hearing me?
I'm hearing, I'm with you.
Okay, fine. We're on a break right now. When we come back, we'll start with you.
No problem.
All right, thank you. Welcome back. Now, in the last 5 months, the call for the review of the minimum wage have remained a prevailing issue as the Nigerian labor unions threaten a massive nationwide protest if government doesn't meet its 30,000 naira monthly demand, and that's about $83. The country's present minimum wage of $51 is one of the lowest in Africa, with workers in Namibia, Benin Republic, Seychelles, Botswana and Gabon set to be among the highest minimum wage earners around the continent. Well, I still have with me Comrade Aremu, Abiodun Aremu, activist and executive member, Joint Action Front, online, on phone. And I also have with me Tony Dania. He is a lawyer and a social commentator with me in the studio. Now, let me quickly come to you now, Abiodun Aremu. From the analysis given by Tony Dania, clearly the labor movement has a long way to go in terms of just asking for salary increase. He talked about public infrastructure that needs to be fought for, because we have a death in infrastructure that is really, really bad. And so if you're talking about increase in salaries, what about all these places where people get to visit public utilities, for instance? You have the hospitals, you have the schools, you have so many things that people make use of. And so what would a salary increase do to them when you know that all these things that they need services for, they will have to pay more for it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. You see, let's put this issue in proper context. Why do you have a government? Go to Section 16 of the Constitution. The objective of why there's a government as it relates to the economy. You will see there that there is the aspect where I talk about there shall be a national minimum living wage, not just any wage. If you look at what is happening, because when you are talking about the ability to pay, the first question to ask, you see, what is the Nigerian national income? Where is the questions of ability to pay when they are jumbo pay for executives and the parliamentarians? The executives and the parliamentarians are living on what you can call living income. And that is why once there is inflation, you have increases in the allowances and all those jumbo things that they're having. You see, by virtue of labor presentation, in line with the constitution of a national minimum living wage, 56,000 represents a baseline. But there has been a shift in grant from 56,000 even to 30,000. So you see this whole argument of coming with infrastructure. Which infrastructure are you talking about? Where there are lootings? With all the lootings that are going on in the country today.
Let's hold your thought now. Tony Dania wants to respond to you.
When you are talking about ability to pay,
yes,
you must be objective about what you are pushing.
Yeah.
Yes.
We are saying that a situation where a professor in the university, we have 500,000 naira per annum. The same professor now translated into a senator, just enough. The same professor translated into a senator can earn 13-point-something million. So when you are talking in terms of investment in agriculture, in education, was that commensurate in terms of investment in that? So it's easier to go and be a senator whose wife can pay the wage of, it's important.
Okay, hold your thought for now.
So the economy has the ability. What we are saying is that the economy has the ability.
Right.
Because from the same national income that a professor now as a senator and as a professor as an academician,
okay,
you can see the wage differentials.
All right, fine. That's okay then. Let's quickly get Tony Dania to respond.
Yes, Comrade Aremu, your argument makes sense, but you see, your agitation sometimes sounds selfish, with due respect, because the Nigerian Labour Congress is the single entity that can lead Nigerians to protest against certain wrongs. If you had come up with a strong protest against the jumbo payments of allowances to members of the National Assembly, abuses of security votes, non-functional public facilities, you will win the heart of Nigeria. You will be more justified. But canvassing argument towards that area at a time when you are agitating for increase in salary is not too good. It suggests that you are trying to play on the sentimental intelligence collectively of Nigerians. Having said that, we need to protest. Governors will rule for 2 terms and they are entitled to so much money. A Nigerian worker will work for 35 years entitled to nothing. I even pity the police. The police is worst off. So your protest, please, Nigerians have been hearing this, but it's as if there's nothing they can do. The only time the government feels protest is when Nigerian Labour is standing up to protest against something. And then when you stand up to protest against those wrongs you're trying to use to support your argument for increase in salary, Nigerians will support you. We have spoken heavily against this backdrop of payment of salary. And by the way, these salaries, Nigerian members of the National Assembly are among the highest paid.
Okay, that's fine. Let's hold your thought. Let's quickly get Comrade Aremu to respond. What's your take on his?
The point is that the commentator in the studio is misunderstanding what the issues are. We are talking of national minimum wage. You think it's just about public servants that they are talking about? Minimum wage is also a factor in redressing what distribution in the society. Let me give you an information that will surprise you.
I wish you were here.
The income of the executives, the incomes of those in national assemblies, form part of the capital flight that we're experiencing in this country today. Because what they consume, where their children school, where they have their hair, is taking our money out. Is that same national income, that minimum wage that you see, that is circulating the economy?
But are the members of the National Assembly following minimum wage?
Hold on. Hang in there. Let me land.
Please, don't listen. That is the wage that is available in the economy today. You get it? All those money you are paying the National Assembly, the money you are paying the presidencies, they are money that are out, that are servicing the economy. So when you are talking of national minimum wage, it's not about public servants. It's the baseline of a wage that the country should pay. And that is why in negotiating the wage are negotiated based on a lot of factors that are involved. So when you are talking of ability to pay, you should ask yourself, it's the same way they talk about private capital. You have private capital in Nigeria, yet they have borrowed national income to the tune of 3.3 trillion. You see, for failed banks in this country.
Okay, that's fine.
Public institutions, public infrastructure that we're talking about.
Comrade Aremu, I have to hold your thoughts now. Yeah, you've made your point quite salient. Now,
no, but the issue is that the issue at stake is reviewal of minimum wage. We had a minimum wage. We have an existing minimum wage of 19,000 or so. We are talking about reviewing it. It's supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. That is the issue. We are now canvassing arguments to support the review. That is what we are doing. So it's wrong of you, Aremu, with respect, to say I don't understand the issue.
Okay, fine.
Sorry, please.
Okay, no
I haven't said that. Are the members of the National Assembly following the minimum wage? They are not, of course. It's not affecting them. So my position is that if you are using that to canvass argument to enhance the upward review of minimum wage, I am saying it is wrong.
Okay,
I am saying is that you are supposed to take that issue separately and let Nigerians support you to protest against this jumbo pay they are giving to
you've made your point right on the head.
Yes.
But the issue remains, there's a strike looming next month, and the NLC isn't ready to back down. Where do you see this headed? How can we stop this from happening? Because it will affect homes, it will affect businesses, and they seem not to care because they are interested in getting their salaries reviewed.
That is why I said they are selfish. I'm not afraid to say that. I said they are selfish because they can control, for instance, if Nigerian Labour Congress comes up to say, let's start strike on social day, even if I'm not happy with it. And a lot of private businessmen are not happy, private business owners are not happy with it. They have no choice. It will affect a lot of things, and but there's nothing you can do. It's as if you can't help the situation.
Yeah.
You just must support the strike. Now, when you know you have that kind of power, challenge the wrong things that is happening in the society.
Okay.
Let me hear Labour come up tomorrow and say we will call Nigerians to go on strike if they don't review the payment. For
That's a good way to hold it there. Now, Comrade Aremu, what's your take? Final words.
Let the Minister of Labour respect the agreement reached at that tripartite committee. The Minister of Labour is economical with the truth. He's the one creating this confusion. There is a minute of that last meeting. Let it make it public. You get it? Where there was an agreement of 30,000 naira. Whatever Minister Ngige is feeding the public is distortions. You see, of what happened. 30,000 did not just come from the blue. You see? And that is why we challenge him from the point of Joint Action Front. Let Igige get made available, not twisting the fact, not acting the shoes of some governors at that level. Let the organized private sector who are represented there come out, ask them, how did they arrive at 30,000 naira? But you see, for employers are smart. Because even if the wage is 1,000 naira, they will not want to pay. That's the work of a slave driver. You don't want to pay for services. So that is the point.
Okay.
You see, we are past the stage of how people play on us. You know, it's the same way it is coming up with all manners of things, non-elected members cannot negotiate. We are going to introduce no work, no pay. Those are all the diversions. So
it doesn't bother you if businesses are, collapsed and all when the strike begins on November the 6th?
That is deliberately creating confusion for everybody in the country. There was an agreement at that commission. That's the challenge now to start with. Presentation by labor of 56,000 naira. Agreement at that tripartite team was 30,000 naira. It's Igige causing that confusion.
Okay,
let's stop that distortion. Let Igige make available the resolutions of that meeting and all the issues that were discussed at the tripartite commission.
Okay.
Not speaking the mouth of anybody. Let the organized private sector come and say whether it was a 30,000 agreement or not. All right, Comrade Abiodun Aremu, we'll have to leave it right now for all you've said. Thank you very much for your analysis on the show. And I also like to thank Tony Dania, lawyer and social commentator. We appreciate your insights on Africa today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, at a time when unemployment rate is said to be a ticking time bomb in Africa, most of those employed find themselves stuck between a rock and a hard place where working conditions are largely deemed unsafe and take-home pay is unsustainable. But for any nation to prosper, leaders must become responsible and responsive in meeting the plight of the working class, ensuring that the dignity in labor is realized and the potential of industry is maximized. And that is our package for tonight. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one again, I am Esther Mokwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.